Good morning and welcome to another online Sunday school class with Tunnel Hill Baptist Church. As always, we like to begin by reminding you that we here at Tunnel Hill Baptist Church believe that Jesus is the Christ, that He is the Son of the living God who lived a perfect life and died a sacrificial death for your sins and for mine, and that if you will place your hope and trust in Jesus Christ as both Lord and Savior, that you will be saved. If you would like more information about what it means to make Jesus Christ your Lord and Savior, we would invite you to follow the link in the description that will take you to a full gospel presentation, as well as how to respond to the gospel and how to connect with Tunnel Hill Baptist Church. If you live in the Hardin County, Kentucky area, we would invite you to join us for worship at 11 o'clock on Sunday mornings, right here at Tunnel Hill, as well as online through Facebook Live. If you do not live in the Hardin County, Kentucky area, we would still love to connect with you and help you find a Bible-believing church where you do live. As we continue on in our study, we are in session 12, and session 12 is titled Humble Beginnings. And we're going to be looking at Micah chapter 4, verses 6 through 8, as well as chapter 5, verses 1 through 9. So again, this is session 12, titled Humble Beginnings, looking at Micah chapter 4, verses 6 through 8, as well as chapter 5, verses 1 through 9. We like to often begin our studies with asking a question and kind of giving us an opportunity to start to have a discussion and interact. And this session is no exception. And the book begins with this question. It says, "When have you witnessed a victory that came after you counted the situation or the game to be hopeless and already lost? And how do these types of situations impact a person in the future?" And here's what we want you to do. When we ask questions throughout this study, we're going to encourage you to pause the video and take some time to actually interact with the question. And so you can do that by pausing the video and getting pen and paper, writing some things down so that we kind of have some back and forth. You may also take some time and if you're watching this with other people, have discussion and really talk things through. And then in both cases, whether you're finished writing or you're done discussing, whatever it might be, we want you to then just hit play again and just continue on in the video. And so let's do that right now. Let's pause the video and let's answer this question, which is, when have you witnessed a victory that came after you counted the situation or the game to be hopeless or already lost? How do these types of situations impact a person in the future? Pause the video and either write some things down or have that discussion, and then we'll return and continue on in our study. So you've probably thought about, maybe you've talked about some games. This is kind of a question that I think really kind of points to sports. It seems like a lot of the times our questions kind of point to either some sort of sporting analogy or maybe just being a guy. I see it that way. But I could see this going other ways. One way that I could see this happening is if you had some sort of maybe just kind of a lot of things to do on your checklist, and maybe you had all of these things to get done. Certainly coming up to the Christmas season, we know what it feels like to have, presents to wrap and things to cook and parties to attend. It's just too much going on that we are overwhelmed and think that it can't get done, and it does. But I really like the kind of the follow-up to that question, which is, how does that affect a person in the future? And so, like, say you had just what seemed to be an insurmountable to-do list that you never got, there's no way you're going to get it done, and you managed to get it done. You're going to say in the future, okay, I know I did this before, and I'm confident I can do that. This list seems impossible, but I know I can do it. You may also think about, like that sporting event thing. And I was thinking about, when I was reading this, I was thinking about my brother-in-law. And my brother-in-law does not leave a game early. If we go to a football game or a baseball game or a basketball game, whatever it might be, he does not leave that game early. And I think that's because he's left games early, or he's turned off the game and gone to sleep, or whatever it might be. And because he did that, he missed out on that great comeback. He and I are both baseball fans, big fans of the St. Louis Cardinals. And that's one thing about baseball, is you can be down a lot of runs. And especially when you think about the Major League Baseball, is that you can have a good inning and you can get right back in it and make that comeback. And I've seen that happen. I know he's seen that happen. And so if he and I go to a Cardinals game together, we know we're not leaving early, because the last thing we want to do is get to the car and start making our way home only to find out that we missed, a great comeback and a great victory by our favorite sports team. And so there's no question that sometimes when we feel like everything is lost. And then when we realize that that actually wasn't the case, that it makes us think differently when we're in similar situations in the future. As we look at our study today in Micah, we're going to be reminded of how God uses humble beginnings to change the world. Micah painted a picture of peace and security for those who fully trusted the Lord. Excuse me. It says that in today's session, the verses relate to the upcoming destruction of Jerusalem and the return of the remnant, the coming of the Messiah, and the return of Christ. We have the privilege of looking back on the life of Jesus in the New Testament so that we can more clearly understand what is taking place. However, what we're going to see here is that the Lord is going to gather to himself all of the injured and lame who have been scattered into exile with the remnant. With this remnant, he was going to build an eternally strong nation. And that's what we're going to read about in Micah chapter 4, verses 6 through 8. And that's where we're going to turn right now. So turn with me to Micah chapter 4. We're going to pick up in verse 6 and read through to verse 8. And as we do so, I would like you to follow with me. It says, "On that day," this is the Lord's declaration, "I will assemble the lame and gather the scattered. Those I have injured, I will make the lame into a remnant, those far removed into a strong nation. Then the Lord will reign over them in Mount Zion, from this time on and forever. And you, watchtower for the flock, fortified hill of daughter Zion, the former rule will come to you. Sovereignty will come to daughter Jerusalem." So we need to look at what God is saying here and the actions that God is taking in this passage. And we recognize that Israel is about to be, and I think this includes both the northern and the southern kingdom, that they are going to be completely kind of lamed and hindered and scattered. And so there's a overwhelming kind of description of loss and of weakness and of dependence here. That those who are lame and those who are injured, that those who are scattered, that all of them have this like sense of dependence. They are dependent on the foreign nation where they live. They are dependent on others to help them move around. When you think of someone who is lame, of being carried and taken care of by friends, and injured is even that needs people to nurse them to health and take care of them. So this is a position of weakness for the nation of Israel, both the north and the southern kingdom. All of Israel is what we're talking about now. This is a position of weakness. And God is going to come in and take what is weak, and he is going to be the one that makes it strong. Now, it's important to note that when he talks about their weakness and the fact that they're lame, he's acknowledging that he's the one that created that situation. And because of Israel's rebellion and because of their unwillingness to rely on him and trust in him, and because they have turned to foreign gods and to themselves in order to be strong, he's going to be the one who does this. But he, that does the weakening, that does the injuring. But he is also going to, through that, make them stronger. And I had to be reminded of Paul's words that we can read in the New Testament when he says that God's strength is perfected in my weakness. That because I am weak, and though I am weak, I will be strong in him. And there's this reminder here that when Israel is finally injured and weakened and harmed and all of those things, that when they come to that point and they acknowledge that, and they acknowledge and cry out to the Lord depending on him, that when that happens, that's when God is going to be able to move in and return them to strength and give them a hope and a future. That's when he will gather them and he will make them strong. In fact, even make them, the implications here is make them invincible so that they will be able to stand up against their enemies. And it's a wonderful, wonderful thing. This is what God is going to do. That is his actions. And it leads us to this question in the book, which is, how do these actions reinforce our understanding of the sovereignty of God? And let's take a couple minutes and let's discuss that, pausing the video, writing some things down, having that discussion, and then we'll return in a few minutes. All right, so how do these actions reinforce the sovereignty of God? And we're just reminded from this that He's the actor. He's the one who is doing this, that it is not that Israel is going to make themselves strong. It's not that they're going to go through some hard things, but that's going to make them better and that's going to make them stronger. But rather it is that in their weakness, in their scattered state, when they finally recognize their total dependence on God, that is when God is going to work. He is the agent. We are the ones dependent on Him. The book goes on to say that a day was coming when God would assemble the people out of those who had been scattered, a people who would return to Jerusalem, and God would establish them and rule over them forever. This promise for the future set the stage for the big birth announcement found in the next chapter of Micah's prophecy. The book goes on to ask this question, which is, how does the promise of a future bring hope when enduring God's discipline? And we can kind of discuss that together. There has to be good news in the fact that there are bad things that are coming, that there are bad things that you're about to experience and about to come, but there are also things on the other side of those bad things. And sometimes that's hard for us, but it's important for us to hear that as well, is that, we go through hard times. Sometimes we go through hard times and we go through difficult times because we just live in a fallen world and it's just going to be here. Sometimes we go through hard times because of our own sin and our own failures to trust in God, and God chastens us and God disciplines us. And sometimes we go through hard times just because God is doing something and God is working in our lives and creating that strength in us. There's all these different things that happen, and it's important for us as we are going through hard times to not so much try to understand what God is doing and try to rationalize and create a reason for it, but rather it is important for us to remember that there is something on the other side of those hard times, that there is a hope and a future on the other side of those things. And a lot of times if we remember that we are struggling and that we are suffering, but God has got good things in store for us on the other side of those things, that can really do a lot to just help us as we endure, that those hard times are not forever, that they will not last forever, and we can trust Him in that. Micah told about a future ruler born in Bethlehem who would lead after the remnant returned from exile. The humble ruler would shepherd God's people, instituting peace throughout the earth. And let's look at that. This is Micah chapter 5, verses 1 through 6. As I look through this, I want you to take note of how these verses impact lives even today, and how fitting on the Sunday that we kind of do our Thanksgiving meal, the Sunday right before Thanksgiving, that we're already jumping into what is often called a Christmas passage. It says this, it says, "Now, daughter, who is under attack, you slash yourself in grief. A siege is set against us. They are striking the judge of Israel on the cheek with a rod. Bethlehem Ephrathah, you are small among the class of Judah. One will come from you who will rule over Israel for me. His origin is from antiquity, from ancient times. Therefore Israel will be abandoned until the time when she who is in labor has given birth. Then the rest of the ruler's brothers will return to the people of Israel. He will stand and shepherd them as in the strength of the Lord, in the majestic name of the Lord his God. They will live securely, for then his greatness will extend to the ends of the earth. He will be their peace. When Assyria invades our land, when it marches against our fortresses, we will rise against it, 7 shepherds, even 8 among them." We see in this passage a description of Jesus, and one that we often quote and one that we often talk about when we go through this. Now, there's a lot going on here, and this is one of those interesting things about prophecy, especially when we start getting into messianic prophecy, is there's like an immediate thing, there's a long-term thing, or even like a Jesus aspect of it, and then often there is a consummation aspect of it. So what we see happening here is we have like the immediate thing. This is what this prophecy means for the people right now. And then there's like a Jesus aspect of it, which is this is something that's telling us about the person of Jesus. And then also with that is, and this is like the grand eschatological significance of all of it, which is this is what it means for eternity. So imagine for a second that Micah in his prophecy here, and as we look at this, we're seeing stuff that's supposed to affect them right then and there. In that context, in that time in history, something that is significant or that has an impact on who we understand Christ to be and the coming of the Messiah, and on something which is a future thing, for them at least, and something that is eschatological, something that is an eternal thing. So even for us reading today, there's something that was in the past when it was written, something that we see from the New Testament, and also something that we would see almost in a book of Revelation or understanding at the consummation of time type of aspect. It's all there and it's all present. And what's interesting is that they're seeing it, or they're speaking to it kind of all at once. And so you have all of those things happening in this passage at the same time, so that as we look at it, it looks like it's all talking about one singular event, but it's actually talking about a lot more and a much bigger thing than we might necessarily see. Having said that, kind of breaking this down again, we see first off of the destruction of Israel in the first part, that you'll be under attack, that you'll slash yourself in grief, that there'll be a siege, that that they'll strike the judge, and that as idea of the scepter or rule or the head of Israel on the cheek with a rod. And there's just all of this points to the beginning is saying, listen, there's going to come a day, and it's coming, where Israel will be no more, where Jerusalem will be taken down, where our rulers, our leaders, our judges will be struck by the rod. That idea of being struck on the face by a scepter or by a rod is implying that there's going to come a day where a foreign king, where a foreign ruler is going to come in and completely take care of Israel. That we have that kind of finishing off of things. But, and that but in verse 2 is such a powerful thing. He says, but along with that, we are going to have a situation where then the Messiah is going to come, and there's going to be these good things. And it mentions a Messiah that is going to be humble, that is going to come from this town of Bethlehem that was so insignificant in the days of the conquering of the land in Joshua, that doesn't even get mentioned among the towns and villages that come to that exist in the land given to Judah, and yet is significant because that's where David is from. David and his family are from. Jesse lived in Bethlehem. David shepherded flocks around the village of Bethlehem. That was home for David. And so even the mention of Bethlehem and saying that this child will come from Bethlehem is a callback to the Davidic king, and really drives home the fact that we're talking about a messianic king figure. This humble king will become the ruler and will do all of these things. The book asks this question. It says, what is the significance of this promised deliverer being born in humble setting? Why don't you take a couple minutes to discuss that? I'll read it again. What is the significance of this promised deliverer being born in a humble setting? Take a couple minutes to discuss that, and then we'll keep going in our study. All right, so I think the most significant thing for us is this is how Jesus came to be. Is that this is talking about Jesus, and Jesus was this shepherd king that would be born in Bethlehem and laid in a manger after he was born to sleep, and that the shepherds and all them found him lying in that manger, and that we really think of this humble king. I think the most significant thing about this is the fact that it's what happened, is that it's true. And that's exactly what God did. Now, I think the long-term significance of what we should learn about this is that we are constantly being called to be humble before God. I think I was reading scripture today in a kind of an unrelated passage, and I really was trying to wrap my mind about what God was communicating and how to kind of understand, specifically Jesus. I was in the Gospels, what Jesus was trying to say. And I think ultimately what I kind of landed on is the fact that God is horribly opposed to this proud, haughty, self-righteous mindset. And that was really even in Israel at this time, as they had this arrogance and this self-righteousness to them, where they thought that because they were Israel, that they could kind of get away with anything and everything, and that God just had to be okay with it. And they even though they were sinners and should have been humble, repenting, and turning to God, they were arrogant and self-righteous in that. And I think that when we even see that this Davidic king, that this Messiah came in a humble way, it is a reminder for us that we ought to approach God with humility, understanding that we are dust and that He is the sovereign Lord of all, and that we are sinners and that He is righteous, and that we should have an overwhelming just humility about us and who we are. The book goes on and kind of points out some of the things that we see this king do. And as we look back on the text, we get the idea that after, verse 3 talks about that therefore Israel will be abandoned until the time when she who is in labor is given birth. The rest of the rulers will return to the people Israel. There's an idea here that after all is said and done, where we have the exile and then we have the return, then it says that He will stand and He will shepherd them in the strength of the Lord, and that He will make it so that they live securely, and that His greatness will extend to the ends of the earth, that He will bring about peace. And even if the enemies of God, which is what Assyria is in verse 5, and try to invade and try to march, that He and His shepherds will defend against it. And what we see from this is He's going to bring about this everlasting peace. There's a reason why we talk about, and we get this from Isaiah as well, that He is the Prince of Peace, mighty God. And so we see that this David king, this Messiah, is going to come, and He is going to usher in peace, and He is going to bring all the nations together. And that's exactly what we see in Jesus. That Jesus came and he preached the gospel of peace to the nations, so that His kingdom would not be of this world, but would expand to every tribe, tongue, and nation, and that He would bring about peace, but not just the ultimate peace that we have when we have the new heaven and the new earth and all things are set right, but He brings peace between us and God. And that we will dwell securely knowing that we have made peace with God and that we are His children. The book goes on, it says, Israel would need to hold this message in hope, so that when dark days descend, message of hope as the dark days ascended on the horizon. Let's read verses 7 through 9 as we close out our time together. It says this. It says, Then the remnant of Jacob will be among many people, like dew from the Lord, like showers on the grass, which do not wait for anyone or linger for mankind. Then the remnant of Jacob will be among the nations, among many people, like a lion among animals in the forest, like a young lion among flocks of sheep, which tramples and tears and passes through, and there is no one to rescue them. Your hand will be lifted up against your adversaries, and all your enemies will be destroyed. And so we see in this final passage and in this final part of the book that we see really kind of, like I said, some of that consummation, the return of Christ. And there's an idea here that even though they're going to go through hardship now, that there will come a day where Israel will be restored, that they will be a blessing to the nations, but they will also be a judge of the nations, and that they will be the one who administer justice for the Lord, and really in a definitive, powerful way, that Israel will not only bless those who it's really going back to that Abraham covenant, that God will bless those who bless Abraham, and that God will curse those who curse Abraham. And all of these things will come about as we look again at this passage, and the characteristics that the remnant of Jacob will be among the people, like dew from the Lord and showers of grass. These are terms of blessing and encouragement and support. However, they will also be among the nations like a lion among sheep, that trample and tear and destroy their enemies. And so the book asked this question, which I really liked. It said, what role does trusting God play for the remnant, and how does the remnant point to God's grace and justice? So let's deal with that question first, and then I want to kind of deal with kind of both things there. So we see that first off that the remnant of God is going to be that blessing. And how does the remnant point to God's grace and justice? Take a couple minutes and discuss that, and then we'll close out our study shortly. All right, so we already mentioned that he refers to the remnant as that they're going to be like showers and like dew among the nations, and that they're going to be this blessing. And we see that because of who Christ is, because of the early church, and because of the gospel message. And there's no question that to the nations, the people of God, the remnant, and I'm one of those people that really holds to this language, even points to the church, that those who belong to God, and that the church, even today, is a blessing to the nations because we come with the good news. And and as we look at Romans chapter 10, it says, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news. And so we are a blessing to the nations because we have the gospel message. And we take that, and that is soothing and cool water and blessing and refreshment and hope and peace and joy in the future because of God's grace and God's love. And because of that, we are a blessing. And so hopefully you kind of get that. But then look at the second part. Look at the second part of there when he says, but you'll also be like a lion among animals in the forest, a young lion among the flocks there to trample and tear as you pass through. And there's a reality that to some, we are life. And we bring the gospel of life, and they're going to hear and believe and be saved. But to others, we are condemnation. And that when we come with the gospel, that those who receive the gospel and believe, that they will be saved. But to those who reject it, we are death. And that they will reject it, and that ultimately they will stand in judgment before God, having no excuse because they knew and they rejected it. And so we see this both, and the Bible talks about this. I believe it's in Romans chapter 1, I think it is. Paul speaks of this same thing, that we are proclaiming the gospel, which is life to those who believe and death to those who don't believe. And this leads us to our last question of our thing, and it's, what is the difference between those who receive God's blessing and those who receive God's wrath? And I want you to think about that really in light of where we are today. What is the difference even today about those who receive God's blessing and those who receive God's wrath, and what is our role in all of that? So take a couple minutes, close out your time discussing that, close in prayer, and then we want to encourage you to join us for worship at 11 o'clock right here at Tunnel Hill Baptist Church. If you can't be with us in person, we encourage you to join us online through Facebook Live. Thank you so much for joining us today. God bless.